Episode 6. He was reported 3 times. The first report was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no panic, no visible danger. It was written quietly at the front desk of a police station late in the afternoon. The woman spoke calmly, explaining that a man had been watching her for several weeks. He appeared outside her apartment building at night and waited across the street when she left for work in the morning. She said he never spoke, never approached, never touched her. But he always watched. The officer listened and typed. There were no threats, no physical contact, no crime in progress. The report was logged as suspicious behavior. She was advised to stay alert and contact police if the situation escalated. She asked whether someone could speak to the man. The officer explained there was nothing to justify it. She signed the form and left. The man was never contacted. For months later, another report came in. A different woman from a different part of town described nearly the same behavior. A man who appeared repeatedly, who seemed to know her routine without explanation, who stayed just far enough away to avoid confrontation. This time, the woman had a name. She had overheard it once and written it down. Mark Ellison. Police checked the system. There were no prior arrests, no restraining orders, no outstanding complaints. The report was filed under harassment. Once again, there was no follow-up. 2 weeks later, the woman was found dead in her car. The engine was cold. The doors were unlocked. There were no clear signs of a struggle. The case was ruled undetermined. The connection between the two reports was not made immediately. Different officers handled them. Different districts reviewed them. Different assumptions shaped the response. It took a third warning. This time, the woman did not come to the station. She called. Her voice shook as she spoke. She said the same man had been appearing near her workplace, watching from a distance, knowing where she parked. She said she felt hunted. The call was recorded. The details were entered. The same name appeared again. Mark Ellison. An officer visited his address. Ellison answered the door politely, denied everything, and appeared calm. There was nothing illegal inside the home. No reason to detain him. The officer left. 3 days later, the caller disappeared. When she failed to arrive for work for 2 consecutive shifts, coworkers contacted police. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment was locked from the outside. Her body was found less than 2 miles from where she lived, hidden in a wooded area behind an abandoned warehouse. There were no witnesses. No signs of a struggle at the scene. The cause of death was determined within hours. Strangulation. Investigators withheld the information from the public. They needed time. Time to understand what they were dealing with. They pulled the earlier reports again. The quiet ones. The ones that had never been escalated. 3 women. 3 warnings. 1 name. For the first time, Mark Ellison was no longer just a person of interest. He was a suspect. Once the pattern was acknowledged, everything moved too fast and too slow at the same time. Detectives canvassed neighborhoods, reviewed traffic cameras, and searched cell phone data. Ellison's name appeared repeatedly in proximity reports. Not close enough to prove guilt, but close enough to make coincidence unlikely. Media attention grew. Anonymous sources leaked details. The word serial appeared briefly in headlines before being pulled back. Police denied it publicly. Privately, a task force was formed. Ellison was brought in for questioning again. This time, the tone was different. He remained calm and measured, answering questions without hesitation. He corrected officers on minor details. When asked why his name kept appearing, he smiled and said people often misunderstood quiet men. He was released. Within 48 hours, another woman vanished. She lived alone and worked remotely. By the time police entered her apartment nearly a week later, the air was stale. This time, there were signs of a struggle. Small ones? Easy to miss. Her body was discovered buried behind a property Ellison had access to through temporary work. The evidence was no longer theoretical. Search warrants were issued immediately. Ellison was arrested that night. Inside his residence, investigators found personal items that did not belong to him. Clothing. Personal effects. Phones that had been wiped but not destroyed. The arrest did not bring immediate answers. Ellison did not resist. He did not demand a lawyer. He did not appear confused. During later interrogations, he spoke slowly and deliberately, choosing his words with care. He avoided direct responsibility while acknowledging details only he could know. He corrected investigators on timelines and pointed out minor errors in their assumptions. When asked why his name had appeared so many times before the murders, he paused. Then he explained that the reports had reassured him. Each one confirmed that attention did not equal intervention. That being noticed did not mean being stopped. He described watching routines rather than people. Learning patterns rather than personalities. When investigators pressed him about the victims, he showed little reaction. There was no visible anger, no remorse, no satisfaction. The violence itself, he said, had never been the focus. Control was. Psychologists later described his behavior as emotionally detached but fully aware. He understood the consequences of his actions. He simply did not assign them moral weight. The trial exposed more than the crimes. Prosecutors focused less on brutality and more on the sequence of missed opportunities. They presented timelines showing when reports were filed, how they were categorized, and where they were allowed to stall. Officers who had taken the original complaints testified. Some admitted they remembered the cases only after reviewing records. Others stated they had followed existing procedures. The defense emphasized technicalities. They argued that suspicion without physical evidence could not justify intervention. That policy had been followed, even if the outcome was tragic. Families of the victims attended every session. They rarely spoke. They listened. When the verdict was delivered, it was unanimous. Mark Ellison was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He showed no visible reaction. Outside the courtroom, officials promised reform. New protocols were announced. Training programs were revised. None of it changed what had already happened. In the years that followed, the case became a reference point within law enforcement training. Not as an example of investigative success, but as a warning. New officers were taught to recognize patterns early. To treat repeated complaints as signals rather than isolated noise. To understand that the absence of violence did not mean the absence of threat. The neighborhoods connected to the case gradually returned to routine. New residents moved in. Streets regained their normal rhythm. For the families, closure never arrived. What remained was not only grief, but the knowledge that intervention had been possible. That the outcome had not been inevitable. The case did not change how criminals hid. It changed how warnings were understood. Because sometimes danger does not go unnoticed. Sometimes it is recorded, acknowledged, and still allowed to continue,